In my third year at the company, I received official written feedback from HR. It said I was, and I'm quoting directly, demonstrating an unhealthy pattern of taking ownership outside my defined role, which creates an environment where teammates feel undervalued and unable to contribute. I read it twice, signed it, then asked one question. 3 years earlier, I joined as a mid-level engineer at a Series B company in Austin. Infrastructure work, four-person dev team, a technical manager named Phil, who knew the code base better than anyone and ran the team the way good managers do, by staying out of the way until something actually needed him. By the end of my first year, people were coming to me before they went to Phil. I didn't engineer that. It just happened the way these things do. I fixed something that was breaking during a Friday deploy when nobody else was around, then explained what I'd done so it wouldn't break again, then started doing that every time. If a new developer couldn't get their environment configured, I'd walk them through it in Slack at 10 p.m. If two components were quietly heading toward a conflict 2 sprints out, I'd flag it before the sprint even started. I kept a running document of the things that had gone wrong in the past 18 months so new people could learn from them without having to repeat them. Phil called me the institutional memory. I called it not being able to watch something go sideways when I could see it coming. Phil got promoted to a director role in February and moved to a different part of the organization. The team ran without a formal lead for 6 months. Those 6 months, I ran the weekly syncs, distributed the sprint tasks, communicated with product when they had questions about timelines, and handled the cross-functional coordination that normally falls to someone with lead in their title. The team shipped on time every quarter. Nobody asked me to do any of this. Nobody asked me to stop either. Then Greg, our CEO, sent a calendar invite to the whole team. He introduced Sarah at the meeting. She was 34, had spent 3 years in marketing, 2 in operations, and most recently had led an internal employee engagement initiative that Greg described as having real impact on company culture. Her technical background was not mentioned, presumably because there was nothing to mention. Greg said, "Ethan covers the technical side. Sarah brings structure and process." Sarah smiled at the room. The room smiled back. First week, she listened, took notes, asked questions that were thoughtful in the way that questions are thoughtful when someone is trying to understand a job they haven't done before. Second week, she launched one-on-one culture check-ins with each team member. 30 minutes each, recurring bi-weekly. Calendar invites sent on a Monday morning before most people had finished their coffee. Third week, new process. All technical decisions now routed through Sarah before implementation. Approvals required, even for small ones. A fix that previously took an afternoon now took an afternoon plus however long it took Sarah to review context she didn't fully have and approve something she couldn't fully evaluate. I adapted. Wrote longer explanations with each request so she'd have what she needed to approve it. Blocked time in her calendar when something was time-sensitive. Relayed context I'd previously just acted on. The releases started slipping by a day or two. Nothing catastrophic. Just friction that hadn't been there before. 6 weeks after Sarah arrived, she stopped me at the end of a team meeting. "Ethan, I've noticed you sometimes step in before teammates have a chance to work through problems themselves. I want to make sure everyone feels ownership. Happy to pull back. Can you tell me which specific situations felt like overstepping?" It's more of a general pattern. Let's discuss it in our one-on-one. The one-on-one was Thursday at 2 p.m. 40 minutes. She talked about team dynamics, psychological safety, the importance of space for others to grow. I asked twice for a specific example, a ticket number, a deploy, a conversation someone had flagged. She said it was more about the overall dynamic than any single incident. I left the meeting and went back to work. She scheduled a meeting to address a pattern. The pattern could not be named. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Team dynamics was mentioned 7 times. Somewhere, a specific example waited patiently and was never called upon. 2 weeks later, a calendar invite appeared. Feedback session, HR plus Sarah. I walked into the conference room at the scheduled time. Sarah was already seated. The HR manager, whose name was Carol, had a printed document in front of her. 2 pages, stapled, my name in the header. Carol read it aloud. 3 points. 1. I frequently took on tasks outside my defined scope, reducing opportunities for peer growth. 2. My informal leadership style created confusion about team hierarchy and decision-making authority. 3. Recommended action. Limit contributions to assigned tickets. Route all cross-functional communication through my team lead. Carol slid the document across the table. I read it twice. The language was careful and HR-shaped. Nothing false on its face, everything technically defensible, nothing that captured what had actually been happening for the last 3 years or the last 6 months. I signed it. Then I asked one question. Just to confirm, I should only work on tickets assigned to me and route everything else through Sarah. Is that correct? Carol, that's correct. Sarah, exactly. I think you'll find it actually reduces your stress levels. Reduces your stress levels. She is describing, with genuine confidence, the effects of a document she just handed to the person who has been running this team for 8 months. The stress levels are about to move in one direction. It is not the direction she specified. I nodded, thanked them both, walked back to my desk. That evening, I opened Jira, looked at my assigned tickets for the current sprint. 5. All clearly scoped, all mine, nothing adjacent, nothing that touched anyone else's work. I finished the one I'd been working on, closed my laptop at 6 p.m., first time in 2 years. At 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, my phone lit up with a Slack notification. Marcus, one of the 4 developers on the team, solid engineer, 2 years at the company, had hit a wall with an integration bug. The kind that looks simple until you're an hour in and realize it isn't. He'd pasted a code block, described what he'd tried, asked if anyone had seen this pattern before. Normally, I would have responded within 10 minutes. I read the message, read it again, opened the thread to see if anyone else had replied. Nobody had. I pressed the eye's reaction and put my phone face down on the nightstand. He read it. He acknowledged it with the one emoji that means, I see this and am not going to help. The eye. The single eye. It is doing more work in this conversation than anything else will tonight. In the morning, I checked the thread before I opened my laptop. Marcus had figured it out at 12:53 a.m., 3 hours after his original message. He'd left a note explaining his solution. Thorough, well-documented, the way he always did things. 3 hours. For something I could have walked him through in 15 minutes. I noted that. Filed it in the same mental category as the 6 p.m. laptop close. Data point. Not a conclusion yet. The first 2 weeks looked from the outside completely unremarkable. I arrived on time, responded to messages, attended every meeting, delivered my 5 sprint tickets ahead of schedule with clean documentation. I was attentive in stand-ups, thorough in code reviews for anything that touched my work, and said nothing that wasn't asked of me. What I didn't do was everything else. The small things that had never been anyone's official job, catching the edge case in someone's implementation before it hit review, flagging when 2 parallel work streams were going to need coordination in 3 days, noticing that the staging environment had been misconfigured and fixing it before it became a problem for the morning deploy. None of those things were in my 5 tickets. I left them alone. They accumulated. Sarah ran her weekly status meeting on Thursdays. She'd introduced a new template. Each person reported green, yellow, or red on their assigned work with a one-line note. Everything was green. The template had no field for things nobody is assigned to that are quietly going wrong. 2 developers on the team started staying later than usual. I saw it in the commit timestamps, in the Slack messages that started appearing after 8 p.m. Nobody said anything in the meetings. After the 3rd Thursday stand-up, all green, same as before, Sarah said, I want to acknowledge that the pace of change can feel uncomfortable at first. This is normal. We're building healthier processes. The team nodded. Nobody spoke. I watched Marcus, across the conference table, look at his laptop screen for a moment longer than necessary before he looked up and nodded too. 4 weeks out from the quarterly release, I would normally have started the coordination work, not in any official capacity. It was never in my job description. Just the practical reality of how the release actually got out the door. I'd go through the upcoming sprint tasks, map which components depended on which, identify where two engineers' work was going to need to fit together, and have quiet conversations before the dependencies became problems. It took maybe 3 hours a week. It had kept every quarterly release on time for the past 2 years. I didn't do it. The HR document was specific. Limit contributions to assigned tickets. Route all cross-functional communication through Sarah. Cross-functional coordination was not my scope. I had that in writing. Sarah ran her status meetings. The board stayed green. Each engineer reported on their own tickets, which were, individually, progressing fine. Nobody had a view of the whole picture. That had always been informal, which meant it had always been mine. Everything is green on the board. The board is not load-bearing. 3 integration dependencies are quietly disagreeing with the board's assessment. They have been doing this for 2 weeks. Nobody has introduced them to each other yet. I sat in those meetings and watched the board and said nothing. Week 5, integration testing started. The first conflict surfaced on a Wednesday morning. 2 modules that had been developed in parallel and needed to work together, which they did not. The authentication service expected a data format that the user management component wasn't producing. Straightforward to fix, but it required both developers to stop their current work, coordinate on a solution, and retest. A week of combined effort, minimum. Sarah sent an update to the client distribution list that afternoon. Minor delay due to a technical integration issue. We're actively resolving it and remain on track for delivery. I was copied on the email. I read it twice. We were not on track for delivery. The integration issue that had surfaced was one of the 3 I'd identified 4 weeks earlier. The other 2 hadn't been found yet. I finished my ticket for the day and closed Jira at 6 p.m. My 5 assigned items for the sprint were 80% complete, all green. Sarah sent a follow-up to the team. Great work pushing through this. Resilience is what separates good teams from great ones. I read that one too. Closed my laptop. The release was scheduled for the following Friday. Monday morning, I came in to find a calendar notification waiting. Urgent. All hands. 9 a.m. Sarah had sent it at 7:43. The 9 a.m. meeting had 17 people in it. Sarah had pulled in both product managers, 2 people from the client success team, and the full engineering group. Someone had set up a screen at the end of the conference room showing the release dashboard, a column of items that had been green on Thursday and were now, collectively, a more complicated color. The second integration conflict had surfaced over the weekend. Different components than the first one, different engineers, same fundamental problem. 2 pieces of work that needed to fit together and didn't. The fix for the first conflict had bought back 4 days. This one was going to cost more than that. Sarah ran through the situation quickly. What had been found, what the current state was, what the options looked like. She was composed, which I noted. Then she turned to me. Ethan, can you take a look at this and give us a path forward? The room was quiet. 12 people looking at me. That's outside my current sprint scope. You'd need to assign it to me formally, or have someone else pick it up. The quiet became a different kind of quiet. 4 engineers are currently studying the surface of a conference table with great intensity. The table has not done anything wrong. It is simply the safest place to look right now. Sarah held my eye for a moment. Then she opened her laptop, navigated to Jira, and created a ticket. Assigned it to me. Sent the notification. Done. Thank you. I pulled up the components on my screen. Spent 20 minutes reading through both code bases, traced the conflict to its source. A schema mismatch that had been introduced 6 weeks ago and had been quietly waiting for exactly this moment. Documented the fix, estimated 4 hours of implementation, flagged 2 downstream things that would need to be retested. 4 hours and 20 minutes later, the conflict was resolved. Clean fix, thorough documentation, tested twice. I posted the update in the engineering channel and went back to my other tickets. It didn't matter. I knew it didn't matter before I started. 4 hours was 4 hours, and we were already past the point where 4 hours changed the outcome. The second conflict had been sitting there since week 3. The third one, the one I'd also identified and not flagged, surfaced Tuesday morning, and by then the math had already finished. Thursday afternoon, Sarah sent a calendar update. The quarterly release was moving to Q4. The email to clients went out at 4 p.m. Professional language, brief explanation, commitment to delivery in the next quarter. I was copied, along with the rest of the engineering team. 3 responses came in before end of day Friday. The first was from a mid-sized client we'd had for 2 years. The second was from a startup that had been with us for 8 months. The third was from the company that represented 31% of our quarterly recurring revenue. All 3 said variations of the same thing. They had been expecting the feature for Q3, they were now evaluating alternatives, and they would be in touch about next steps. Churn requests, 3 of them. Same week as the missed release. Sarah sent a message to the team channel Friday at 6 p.m. This is a setback, but setbacks are how teams grow. What matters is how we respond. I believe in this team's resilience. I read it, closed my laptop, walked to my car. The following Monday was the board review. Sarah had been preparing for it since Thursday. I could see the slide deck evolving in our shared drive, the presentation getting reorganized, sections added and removed. The final version was 42 slides. I didn't look closely at what was in them. The meeting was at 10 a.m. in the main conference room. Sarah went in. Greg and 2 board members were already seated. The door closed. I sat at my desk and worked through my sprint tickets. 23 minutes later, the conference room door opened. Greg stepped out. He looked down the hall, found me, and held the door. "Can you join us for a second?" The room had the particular atmosphere of a conversation that has been going in one direction and has just stopped. Sarah was at the far end of the table, her laptop open to a slide I couldn't read from the door. One of the board members, a woman named Patricia, who had been with the company since the Series A, had a legal pad in front of her with 3 lines written on it. Greg closed the door behind me and stayed standing. The previous 3 quarters, this team shipped on time. This quarter, missed release, 3 churn requests in the same week, including our largest account. He looked at me. "Sarah hasn't been able to identify the root cause. Can you walk me through what changed?" I looked at Sarah. She was looking at the table. I reached into my jacket pocket, took out my phone, and opened the HR feedback document. I'd kept it in a folder I'd created the day I signed it, labeled with the date and HR, signed copy. I laid the phone flat on the table in front of Greg and pushed it toward him. 6 weeks ago I received this. I've been following it precisely. Greg picked up the phone. Read. The room was silent. 15 seconds. Maybe 20. 15 seconds of silence in a boardroom is a very long time. It is long enough to read a 2-page HR document. It is also long enough for the author of that document to fully understand what she has written. Greg set the phone down. He looked at it for another moment. Then he looked across the table. "Did you write this?" Sarah looked at the table. "Did the release ship the previous 3 quarters?" "Yes, but the team was still finding its..." "Did Ethan receive a written warning the quarter we missed?" The room was quiet again. Different from the 15-second quiet after Greg read the document. That one had been processing. This one was something else. Sarah didn't answer. Greg set the phone down. He looked at it for a moment, then at me. "What do you need to get the next release out?" I'd thought about this. Not in preparation for this specific meeting. I hadn't known I'd be in it 20 minutes ago, but I'd known what the answer was since the day I signed the document. Reassignment of cross-functional coordination to my scope, formal, in writing. Done? Anything else? That's all. Greg nodded once. Looked at Patricia, who had added a 4th line to her legal pad. She gave a short nod back. "Thank you, Ethan." I picked up my phone from the table and walked out. The engineering team was at their desks when I came back down the hall. Nobody said anything. Marcus was looking at his screen. The other 3 had the particular focused quality of people who are working very hard on whatever is directly in front of them. I sat down, opened my laptop, and pulled up my sprint queue. About 40 seconds passed. Then Marcus, without looking up from his screen. "Everything good?" "Yeah." He nodded once and went back to his code. That was the whole conversation. It covered everything that needed to be covered. At 4:17 that afternoon, a Slack message appeared from Sarah. "Hey, I just want to say I hope we can move past this and work together going forward. I read it. Seen. Not replied to. Not acknowledged. Just seen. In the modern workplace, seen is a complete sentence. It contains a subject, a verb, and a verdict. I went back to my ticket. The next 3 weeks were quiet in the way that things get quiet after a pressure system moves through. Sarah showed up to the Tuesday stand-ups and the Thursday status meetings. She sat in the same seat, opened her laptop, had her one-on-one culture check-in template ready. But the questions that used to come to her, the technical ones, the dependency questions, the who should I talk to about this questions, had stopped going to her weeks ago and now simply went back to their original destination. The team didn't make a thing of it. Nobody announced anything. It just reorganized, the way water finds the path that's actually open. I started doing the coordination work again, mapped the dependencies for the Q4 release, had the conversations that needed to happen 3 weeks before they became problems, flagged 2 things in the architecture that were going to need attention before integration testing. Took about 3 hours a week. Same as always. The release shipped on time, first 1.25. Greg sent a 1-line email to the team. Good work. No slides, no resilience language. 3 weeks after that, a company-wide Slack message announced that Sarah was transitioning back to the operations team, effective the following Monday. Role restructuring to better align with organizational needs. The lead structure for the engineering team would be under review. I read it the same time everyone else did, sitting at my desk, coffee going cold next to my keyboard. Greg's message came the next morning. Direct, not through HR. A short email with a subject line that said, Team Lead, Engineering. The offer was formal. Title change, compensation adjustment, official scope documentation that included cross-functional coordination. Everything in writing, as requested. He asked me to let him know by end of week. I thought about it for a day. Went through my usual process. Not because I was uncertain, but because that's how I make decisions. Looked at what the role actually required. Looked at the team. Thought about the 3 places I'd already identified in the Q4 sprint where components were going to need attention in 2 weeks. Replied Thursday morning. 1 sentence. Yes. First thing I did on the new role. Drafted an HR request to remove the written feedback document from my personnel file. Attached the relevant policy language. Sent it to Greg for co-signature. He signed it the same day. No questions, no back and forth. The document disappeared from the system as quietly as it had arrived. Processed, closed, gone. I opened Jira, pulled up the Q4 sprint. Went through the task list the way I always do. Not ticket by ticket, but looking at the shape of the whole thing, where the work was going to need to meet, and whether it was set up to do that cleanly. Found 3 places where the dependencies weren't mapped yet. Started working through them, flagging owners, blocking out the coordination conversations that needed to happen in the next 10 days. At 5:45, I opened Slack and typed a message to the engineering channel. If anyone's stuck on anything, just ping me. 3 replies in 5 minutes. Marcus sent a thumbs up. One of the other engineers had a question about an authentication edge case he'd been sitting on for 2 days. The third message was from the newest developer on the team, who had joined 6 weeks ago and, as far as I could tell, had been figuring things out almost entirely on his own. Actually, yes. Do you have 10 minutes sometime this week? I checked my calendar. Tomorrow at 2 works. Looking at this situation, we keep thinking about what overstepping actually costs when the person accused of it is the one keeping everything together. Sarah's complaint was technically coherent. Ethan was doing more than his job description said. What the complaint didn't account for was why. He wasn't taking ownership to undermine anyone. He was doing it because he could see problems before they happened, and leaving them unfixed felt worse than the politics of fixing them. The real question this story asks is one most of us have faced at work. When the system tells you to do less, and you can see exactly what doing less will cost, who is responsible for what follows? Ethan didn't sabotage anything. He simply stopped preventing things from going wrong. The line between those 2 actions is thinner than it looks. We think the most honest thing Ethan did in this story wasn't putting the document on the table in front of Greg. It was writing, "Just ping me," on his first day as team lead. after 6 weeks of not pinging back. That was the decision that actually mattered.